This is video 15, demanding the release of Mumia Abu-Jamal from prison. This video I was going to read the the foreword by Cornel West from Mumia's book, Writings on the Wall, titled Revolutionary Love and the Prophetic Tradition. Cornel West. The first opportunity I had to stand publicly with my dear brother and comrade, the revolutionary Mumia Abu-Jamal, was in the 1990s at the Philadelphia gathering of the National Association of Black Journalists, when the organization was scheduled to take a vote on whether to support Mumia. At that meeting, I delivered an impassioned indictment of the refusal of black journalists to support Mumia unequivocally. For Mumia is not just an outstanding writer and journalist, he is a living expression of the best of the black prophetic tradition. For many years, I had known Mumia as someone who is a truth teller, a witness bearer, who exposes lies. In 1985, when the MOVE organization became known to the world after that vicious bombing ordered by Philadelphia's first black mayor, Wilson Goode, I had already developed a great respect for Mumia's journalism, including his writings on MOVE's trivials with the power structure of the city of brotherly love. Although I had not had an opportunity to interact with Mumia personally, I had been the subject of numerous discussions in the National Black United Front, to which I belong alongside Reverend Herbert D. Daughtry and his House of the Lord Pentecostal Church in Brooklyn. Mumia was included in our meditations on one of the living figures in the black community who is part of both the revolutionary and the prophetic tradition. In the 1990s, the voice of Mumia Abu-Jamal emerged in a special context. On the one hand, that decade is a period of reaction because the class war against poor and working people is becoming more intense. Progressive movements are far more dispersed, shattered than they were before. The Black Freedom Movement, under vicious attack, began to lose its vitality. At this moment, we began to hear more from Mumia Abu-Jamal in the public sphere, a rare voice, telling the truth from the vantage point of the wretched of the earth. Then he takes the next vital step, offering a global analysis and calling for a local praxis. During this period, I was blessed to stand with Mumia in court in Philadelphia when Judge Albert Sabo, the judge in his original trial, now presided over Jim Crow appellate process in his case. I remember clearly that Judge Sabo walked into the courtroom with a rigid, bigoted disposition. In contrast, Mumia entered the courtroom with a smile that announced that he was unbroken and on the move. Mumia was stronger than we were. I walked out of there a freer black man by seeing him. I walked out of there more dedicated, more full of conviction by seeing his conviction, his dedication, and his love in the face of the lies coming at him. It was not until Chris Hedges recently took me and Jim Cohen to the prison in Frackville, Pennsylvania, that I first spent time with Mumia face to face. That kind of meeting, which allowed human contact, was possible only because Mumia had been transferred from death row to the general prison population. I was deeply moved when somebody had been through what Mumia had been through. You think you've been down and out, downtrodden, just barely making it, but again Mumia walked out with a smile. His integrity, his style, his unbelievable determination, and just sheer spirit. It was clear to me that John Coltrane, Chris Mayfield, Charlie Bird, and Gil Scott-Heron, all cultural artists who articulate the struggle of our spiritual survivor, were at work in the sparkle in his eye. In the presence of the wonderful juxtaposition, ferocity, and tenderness, I began to leap intellectually to consider that there's David Walker in him, there's Harriet Tubman in him, there's Garvey in him, there's a whole lot of Malcolm X and Fannie Lou Hamer in him. What I witnessed was Mumia Abu-Jamal is rooted in the black tradition that produced him, that he is ready for battle, and steeped in the tradition, He has an organic ability to draw life into his own spirit for the social, political, existential, and economic analysis that he has mastered. And for me, that is the mark of a prophetic figure of our tradition. I've always said that he is the freest man on death row, and in mind, soul, and spirit, he continues to be one of the freest men imprisoned in the early part of the 21st century. Not many people undergo what he underwent and still have what I call a militant tenderness, a subversive sweetness, and a radical gentleness in his demeanor, in his voice, in his singing, and in his writing. In place of bitterness, he radiates gentleness and tenderness. The lack of bitterness in the face of oppression is a sign of spiritual mastery. Young people today, on the front lines of the organization, need revolutionary love like Mumia Abu-Jamal has. They're always going to need the revolutionary memory, never forgetting the great freedom fighters like Frederick Douglass and Ella Baker and Martin. They're going to need revolutionary analysis, and all of it, the revolutionary love, revolutionary memory, and revolutionary analysis, is at work when every page written by Mumia Abu-Jamal. What the young folk might not have is the deep black cultural and history of which Brother Mumia emerges. Mumia is not just a great public intellectual, he's an old-school jazz man who has the elegance of what I call earned self-toughness. That's hard to get. That only happens in particular historical moments like the period after World War II, when people steeped in the rich black Southern culture move to the urban centers. But they're still connected to the deep roots of love and self-affirmation at the level of the body and memory. Young people today are not rooted in this experience. They're third-generation urban. They've grown up in a period of social breakdown, massive unemployment, and crack epidemic, obsession with commodification, and all of this presents them with difficult challenges. It's not a put-down on young people to say that. But Mumia Abu-Jamal is just part of a cultural continuum of struggle that shaped the urban black people between 1950 and 1980, and the fact that he continues on with tremendous courage, vision, and sacrifice that is beyond description, all of that is a mighty tribute both to him and to the people, the culture, and the traditions that produced him. The black prophetic tradition is the principal and creative response to being terrorized, traumatized, stigmatized. In the United States, the oppression of generations of black families and communities is systemic. It has taken the form of white supremacy, enslavement, disenfranchisement, and the terrorism of Jim Crow and Jane Crow justice system. Oppression is also netted out of the level of the individual. It can take the form of being hated and depressed and spat upon. It can take the form of convincing us to hate ourselves, hate our bodies, hate the shape of our nose and lips, and so forth. The black prophetic tradition keeps track of these different forms of oppression. It responds with vision rooted in the analysis of the problem. It spurs praxis through organization and mobilization. And sometimes it takes the form of an isolated voice, like that of the great David Walker. Sometimes it is a voice that goes back into the belly of the beast over and over again, like Harriet Tubman, to rescue black life. Sometimes it's about creating a mass movement in the example of Marcus Garvey. Sometimes, as with the great W.E. Du Bois and Paul Robeson, it articulates a global international analysis, but always based on the understanding of American terror visited upon black people. The black prophetic tradition refused to view black people's condition simply as a Negro problem. It identifies these conditions as catastrophes visited on black people by a system, and it responds with compassion and with deep knowledge that our sacrifice serves as a cause bigger than ourselves. It's impossible to read any of Mumia's texts without seeing profound vision of freedom, not just for black folk, but for everybody. Mumia's outlook always includes all the wretched of the earth, no matter what color or country or gender or sexual orientation. Mumia Abu-Jamal's voice is always on the side of those who are fighting against domination, and that is one of the highest functions of black prophetic activity. We got rich traditions in the Dominican Republic, rich traditions in Jamaica, rich traditions in Barbados, and so forth. But the African American experience is distinct. It is the experience of existing within the most powerful empire in the history of the world, dealing with empire's in-your-face violence and hatred, while still talking seriously about revolutionary love, revolutionary memory, revolutionary analysis. Our truth-tellers are like Brother Mumia, pay a tremendous price for their courage, action, and speech. Many of our precious everyday people pay tremendous price too, whether they're part of the movement or not. But the ones who say, let's shatter the sleepwalking, let's awaken the people, let's expose the lies, let's courageously bear witness, those are the way to the cross, or torment the hands of the FBI or CIA or DHS. That's just the way things operate in America. We've seen it over and over again, from the repression suffered by the abolitionists through Garvey and Martin and Malcolm right up to today. Fannie Lou was viciously attacked and under surveillance. Numerous attempts were made to marginalize Ella Baker, Vicki Garvin, and Paul Robeson were under house arrest for almost a decade. Du Bois was handcuffed when he was 83 years old in February 1951. We can go on and on up to the current moment. In black journalism, probably the greatest figure before Mumia Abu-Jamal was Ida B. Wells Barrett, an American whose level of courage we lack the language to describe. She had a bounty on her head when she was run out of the Memphis, Tennessee. She went to T. Thompson Fortune in the New York Globe newspaper, which embraced her. Then her supporters had to get her out of the country to England because her life was threatening after 3 of her friends had been lynched in Memphis. The risk all level of courage she demonstrated by writing about American terrorism in the South, particularly the subject of lynching, something that Booker T. Washington and Du Bois failed to highlight, is rarely seen today among journalists of any stripe. She was also the first black journalist to write for a white newspaper when she published in the Chicago Tribune, a historically important crossing the color line. Ida B. Wells was a great crusader for justice and a radical reformer. Mumia Abu-Jamal, however, is not a reformer. He's a revolutionary. And he's not writing for pay or tenure. He's writing for people. That means that he's actually engaging in a completely unfettered analysis of the system of domination, capitalism, imperialism, patriarchy, and so forth, and calling for a new world that requires fundamental transformation, a revolutionary transformation of the status quo. See, Ida, whom we love deeply, didn't go far enough, but Mumia Abu-Jamal does. He builds on Ida B. Wells and others. A profound crisis of black professionalism becomes apparent when you look critically, the way Mumia does. The black intellectual and the black elected officials within America's power structure today. We say that there has been a reniggerization of black professional class. They've got money, position, power, but most of them are scared, intimidated, and afraid. That's what niggerization does to black people, keeps us afraid. Mumia Abu-Jamal is one of the most deniggerized black people alive today. He looks terror in the face. He keeps fighting, keeps swinging, keeps writing, keeps loving. Even when he was on death row all those years, Mumia Abu-Jamal was not afraid. T. Thompson Fortune was not afraid. Ida B. Wells was not afraid. Most of our black professional journalists, those in the academy and so forth, are scared. Their career, their position, their access to power, they've succumbed to all the trappings of the paraphernalia of status. But thank God we've got a new generation of young people emerging, and Ferguson is just one sign of it. There's an entire community of people who are definitely not afraid. They've had enough. The challenges going forward will be learning from Mumia Abu-Jamal and others who have taken our rage and transformed them into righteous indignation, how to combine it with a subversive memory, personal integrity, and moral tenacity, and direct it against the indignities and daily injustices of structure of domination. If you don't have the memory and the sense of history, you're not going to have a vision you need. If you don't have the integrity, people are not going to buy off your movement. And if you don't have the tenacity, you're going to run out of gas. So you aren't going to going to be a long-distance runner like Brother Mumia, whose voice and willing instills us, after year, with all we need to run long, run together, run with love, which is what it takes to win. Love is the dominating force that allows us to sustain ourselves, to resist force of domination. Given the ubiquitous commodification in society, where everything and everybody seems to be up for sale, if you don't have a deep love, you'll sell out. I'm talking about love for people, which Mumia Abu-Jamal embodies, a profound, revolutionary, community-building love. A love that sees the business as usual, suffering, impoverishment, and war, and dehumanization as a call to rise up. If Mumia can hold on and voice that call for all these years inside the nightmare and never cave in, then we have no excuse for ever caving in, giving up, or selling out when it comes to the sacred needs of the everyday people we should be willing to live and die for. Mumia is a special brother, and his writings are a wake-up call. He is a voice for our prophetic tradition, speaking to us here, now, lovingly, urgently. Black man, old-school jazz man, freedom fighter, revolutionary. His presence, his voice, his words are the writings on the wall. In solidarity, from death row, this is Mumia Abu-Jamal.